Hey, everybody. My name is Jonathan Marshall. I'm a lawyer by day. My night and weekend job is I work for the West Virginia University, the College of Law. I direct a Center for Consumer Law and Education. And when I have any time in between, I'm usually training with Butch and doing Jiu-Jitsu and MMA types of things. Now, my experience when I decided to do this about 2 years ago was very different than the experience that Butch had. Specifically, I knew who I needed to call. I had a place to train. I had a place where I could find others to train me. And not only that, when I decided to start to compete, I had a place to compete. And that wasn't always the case. And today's podcast is about how Butch and others were able to make the sport or help make the sport what I've now experienced today, which is something that I can do and I have a place to do it at, and then I have a place to compete. And so before we really get started, I'd like, Butch, for you to go ahead and introduce yourself, let everybody know a little bit about you, and then we'll get underway.
Yeah, so obviously my name is Butch Hiles, but I own a gym called Butch Hiles Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. It's here in Charleston, West Virginia, and I've got a couple of, quite a few affiliates around also that train and do the same thing. That is my side gig. So I don't want people to think it's very important to me, but that is not how I make a living. So I do medical device sales, which is my main gig, and I have some other stuff going on. But I guess for people that don't know, some qualifications: I am a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, won Golden Gloves, and did some other things in the sport. I've trained in all this stuff most of my life. It's very important to me. It's a passion of mine. It's a passion that I like to share with others. I grew up in Cleveland, so I moved here when I was like 19-ish, which is important, right? Because I trained in Cleveland briefly in boxing and did some little kind of fights here and there and some boxing matches and stuff. But anyway, that's when I moved here, I was looking to do UFC started just coming out by the 1993, and I moved here around 96 or 97. So anyway, there's something I was looking to do, something I was looking to get into. However, there was nothing like that around. So when I moved to West Virginia, I was looking to pursue or finish up what I was doing in boxing, of course, because that was my only avenue. And then I looked upon a guy named Leon Ramsey is exactly what I was looking for, to train in jiu-jitsu and to train in MMA and train in kickboxing all in one place. So again, I got very lucky, and that's kind of what happened, but that's what started things. And then it continued to grow from there.
But when you first came to West Virginia, were there lots of jiu-jitsu studios? Was MMA a thing?
Yeah, well, no, that's a good point. That's a good question. No, zero, right? So even finding that, it really, with me saying that, it made it sound like, hey, the thing was everywhere. When I say looked upon something, I also need to make it clear that I was in Glenville, West Virginia. Was no offense to Glenville, West Virginia, but there's nobody there, right? It's a very, very small rural county, city, has a college, which pretty much accounts for most of the people, but it's still very, very small. So yeah, there was nothing. So what happened was I just they had, I think it was called the Glenville Pathfinder or something like that. It's a little tiny newspaper. Happened to see an article about Leon Ramsey, actually, who had just fought one of the Gracies, or was in a Gracie tournament, which shocking, right? Because I had watched the UFC in 1993 with Royce Gracie, who won it, and wanted to do jiu-jitsu or MMA, but there was no such thing. Even in Cleveland, there you could not train Brazilian jiu-jitsu because it literally had just came to America or brought to the main stage in 1993. So there wasn't Brazilian jiu-jitsu gyms unless you knew the Gracies. I mean, it wasn't a thing. So when I came to Glenville, of course, I wasn't expecting to find that. I was, looking, everybody knew of boxing. If you're lucky, you can maybe find kickboxing. That was very rare as well. But like I said, it just so happened. I read a thing and this guy was doing that. So he was fighting MMA. And so when I read the paper, I just happened to go work out that night, meaning lift weights at a gym where all the football players lifted. And there he was. And I said, hey, man, are you that guy that fought the Gracies? And he said, yeah. I said, well, how, I'll be damned how this happened, right? And so anyway, so I asked him, hey, can I train? And at the time, they were like more or less to be like a fight club, meaning that was him, a guy named Mike Shepard and a guy named George Randolph, and maybe a couple others, but those are the main people. So I came down to be a sparring partner, or really, to be honest, probably a punching dummy for those guys, right? So anyway, so I did, and I got the crap beat out of me because these guys were getting ready for fights. They're getting ready for boxing matches. And actually, George Randolph, one of the guys there, fought in Pride too, which was the largest MMA event in the world at the time. It was in Japan. It was bigger than UFC. Later, the UFC ended up buying Pride when they had some problems. But anyway, this is kind of stuff these guys were getting ready for, the real deal. I mean, that was, Pride is where then the other Gracies fought, meaning Henzo Gracie, Hoyler Gracie, Hickson Gracie, the guys that are actually, arguably more famous than Hoist in a way. But anyway, yeah, so I looked upon that, was able to train, but, to be honest, like, even though Leon's a great trainer, but he's not, wasn't a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. He was a fight trainer and an excellent fight trainer. But because he was able to introduce me to that, I was also later able to find the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training that I was looking for, really by contacting Hoist Gracie. So.
Right, which again, I think that's kind of an interesting part of this story. I mean, there wasn't anybody really around that you could contact and say, hey, I want to train. Can you train me? So, and we're talking about the late 90s here, maybe, into the early 2000s. So what'd you do about it?
Yeah, so if I'm going to lead into that story, I mean, that was 1997. That training was 96, 97. So I proceeded to win the Golden Gloves, tore my rotator cuff in that, which meant, I had an injury for a year or two. And so I decided, I couldn't throw punches. So I was like, okay, maybe I should get into kickboxing. I use my feet, right? So I did that. And then lo and behold, we started grappling a little bit via some, really, honestly, just watching UFC tapes and watching what Hoist Gracie did. So then what happened was about 98, 99, I transferred colleges from Glenville State to University of Charleston. So when I did that, I looked around for jiu-jitsu, boxing, kickboxing, anything in Charleston. There was nothing again, right? So I went, I found a couple guys online that trained kind of jiu-jitsu. They did some no-gi grappling. They were actually very good. And one of them had fought in Indiana in a good organization there, was a champion there. But anyway, they were also not trained. They were also training off videotapes. That's what people did back then, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what we had to do because there's no gyms. So that it sounds kind of goofy, but that's about like the internet was getting more popular around then. You can get on chat rooms and talk to people. So I got on a mixed martial arts chat room, and Hoist Gracie was on there. And I think I just literally asked, I said, hey man, can you train me? Just being a little naive, right? And he answered, because the internet was so young that it's like, not like he was getting blown up, and not looking at his messages because he was getting millions. It was a time where you didn't really get a lot of messages. So he answered and said, well, sure, bring me out for a seminar. And he had his manager contact me and set up a seminar. So that ended up being about 2002. I mean, a lot of time went by with me trying to find somebody to train me in actual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I fell in love with it by training with those guys, training with Leon Randy. I was more into the grappling. I just really fell in love with that. And so anyway, he answered in 2002, he showed up. And then we started training together. He became my trainer for a couple of years, and that's, kind of progressed from there.
And kind of around this time too, and this probably is kind of becomes part of the larger narrative, you start making some inquiries or challenging, if you will, some more conventional thinking, perhaps, at what at that time was called the Boxing Commission, about MMA in general.
Yeah, and I think we kind of brush over it. Here's all the thing. Like, I'm just trying to be a student of the game, right? So first of all, I'm looking for a place to train. I'm finding things. I'm creating my own opportunities because there is no gym. So it's not like, hey, I want to run a gym, or I want to do this, I want to do that. Like, it just wasn't a thing, right? So just like you said, it was, after I started training jiu-jitsu, I was like, I'd like to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament, right? There was no tournament. So I was like, okay, well then I guess I'll throw a jiu-jitsu tournament. So that was the next thing. So, so then I did a tournament in 2002, and roughly 2002. A bunch of people showed up in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, kind of got started knowing people. That progressed. But then, the same thing. Here I'm also training outside of Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, well, I'm boxing, I'm kickboxing, I'm doing Jiu-Jitsu. Obviously, I have a love for MMA, even though I'm not really training that. I'm training each aspect. So I'm like, okay, well, why is there no MMA fights? Because I'm running into a ton of people and I'm training with people that I find on the internet, like meaning like Leon Ramsey and George and all these people, but there's not really an avenue. So those guys, they're going to Japan to fight, and they're going to Iowa to like weird places to fight because they're doing what I'm doing. They're getting on the internet and they're finding where these things are. So my thing is, why is there not one of these in West Virginia or Ohio or Kentucky, even at that time? But mostly I'm here. Why is it not here? So that's when I start talking to the commissioner, trying to figure some things out. And yeah, it just turns out that wasn't their thing, right? That they just didn't like him. I'll just put it that way, right? It just wasn't something they were going to support, and I didn't understand why. And so that's what kind of started us going back and forth of, why is it not a sport? Why do you not like it? And then after they tell me these things, well, I don't support chokeholds. I don't support this. I don't like this. And then, okay, why don't you? Because chokeholds are in the Olympics and judo, it's perfectly fine. And, on and on and on. So through that, yeah, then we go to the next step where I'm kind of starting to argue with him. I helped bring one of the first MMA events to West Virginia, was part of it with several other people. But that was in Wheeling, West Virginia it was like 2001, I think. I think we talked about it, but yeah, so in that had famous UFC fighters, Dan Severn, who was one of the original UFCs. So I mean, if you think about it, being a big fan of the sport, one of the first UFCs, and arguably one of the biggest fights ever, was Royce Gracie versus Dan Severn at the time. It was a 15-minute fight where they had an Olympic wrestler go against Royce Gracie. Finally gave him his biggest competition at the time, because he never went more than 5 minutes with somebody, really. And then all of a sudden they're in this 15-minute war where Royce is on his back the whole time getting punched, by Dan. Everybody thinks that Severn's winning, and he kind of arguably is most of the fight. And then all of a sudden he gets choked out, and that actually solidifies the legend of Royce Gracie and Dan Severn, to be honest, because after that, Royce, went a separate way, and Dan became, a bigger thing. But the point is, we brought him to West Virginia, one of the guys, and put him on this event, invited the commission to the event, said, hey, let's watch this, see this live. See, that's like, in essence, that would be like us bringing Mike Tyson to Wheeling, right? That's because that was our Mike Tyson. That was our, Evander Holyfield or whatever. And here he is, he's fighting. We're like, man, you wait till you see this stuff. You're going to love it, right? And to be honest, I feel like they did. We asked them. Several of them did. Several of them didn't, apparently.
So. And something changed, right?
Something changed. This is just personal opinion. It doesn't matter. But maybe if they thought of it as a threat of boxing, right? So just personal opinion. It doesn't matter. I don't even know. But it would just, something changed, and they decided, hey, that's never going to be legal here. It's not going to happen, right? So that started a really lengthy battle between myself and the commission, and through emails, through phone calls, through meetings, of trying to get it. It started off on good terms, of just because, like I said, I was putting something forward, I was trying to get that going. And then it was just saying, hey, well, okay, let's talk about the things that you don't like. How can I address them? But they quickly kind of deteriorated to not friendly conversations. And look, I'll take a lot of responsibility. I'm an older person right now, and I'd say that my attitude probably wasn't the best either. When somebody, I probably argued and said bad things, as they did too, right? And that can probably continue to make us a bad spiral. But yeah, anyway, I'm sure there were some other things to talk about. But yeah, does that kind of help make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, the fight did escalate, and you had opened a gym back in 2002, and you'd hosted a jiu-jitsu tournament, and decided you wanted to host another one in 2004. And what happened?
Yeah, so exactly. So we had really one. The first one was a big success. I think we had a couple more after that. Yeah, then lo and behold, 2004, 2005, I throw another tournament. I get a letter of a cease and desist order from the West Virginia State Athletic Commissioner, who was the boxing commissioner at the time. I think it's important to notice or to note that because they are now known as the Athletic Commission, which gives them jurisdiction over athletics, right? And MMA. But at that time, they were a boxing commission. There was even no kickboxing here. They didn't support that. So anyway, that was the first argument, because I get this letter and says, hey, look, we told you we didn't like chokeholds. We didn't like this. This is not allowed here. Okay. And so they shut it down. And my argument immediately was, look, you're overstepping your bounds. You're the boxing commission. You have jurisdiction over boxing. You have jurisdiction over striking events. However, you do not have, jurisdiction over martial arts tournaments, which jiu-jitsu was. We don't have striking. We do not have a closed fist. This is not MMA. This is jiu-jitsu. Just like any other karate tournament at that time. To be honest, there was some other Japanese jiu-jitsu tournaments going on that also featured grappling, and it had been going on for a while. I was not the only tournament, right? So this was really kind of, again, extending their reach to something that they didn't have the right to extend the reach to. So of course that started an argument there, but I'm getting letters that say, if you do this, you're going to go to jail, period. And we're going to fine you. And you're going to do this and that. And yeah, I had some decisions to make. I was a young man at the time with no money and maybe just graduated college, I think, at that time. Well, yeah, I was out of college by that time, but still just didn't have any money. I'm paying back school loans, have nothing. And here in jiu-jitsu tournaments, especially back then, they weren't bringing any money. I'm charging like $25 for people to come and compete, right? And as we said, the internet was not that popular. My marketing skills are not that good. I'm not really doing this as a business. I'm doing this as an avenue for us to compete, right? Like there's just not like, this is crazy at the time. So when I'm fighting for this to be legal or this to happen, it was not, I'm fighting because I have a business running jiu-jitsu tournaments. I'm fighting this because I'm like, what are you talking about? The same reason I was doing the MMA. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is like our right to do this. This is going to be the only state that you can't do jiu-jitsu. What are you talking about? So anyway, yeah. So then I had to go to court and had to take another step.
Let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, pull some things up. Is that pulling it up?
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is in the Circuit Court of Kanawha County, West Virginia, Ernest Hiles, that being you, plaintiff, versus the West Virginia State Athletic Commission. And what this was, as I understand it, you sought after you received that cease and desist order, which, if memory serves me correctly, threatened to throw you in prison if you held the tournament. You filed a motion essentially for a temporary restraining order to prohibit the enforcement of that cease and desist order. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, obviously you're a lawyer too. We didn't announce that, but you have the more insight than anybody else to talk about this stuff right now, which is good, right?
Well,
you can actually teach me a lot of stuff. I was there, but I was so ignorant at the time. Like I have no, you know what I mean? Like I'm amazed that I got through the thing. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting to even kind of think about the timeline here. You had this tournament that was set to begin April 30th. You get a cease and desist letter on April 19th, right?
Yeah. So the timing is suspect, right? We know that people do that on purpose to make it nearly impossible for you to do things, right? So yeah, look at that. We're talking a couple weeks before an event.
No, yeah, like less than 2 weeks.
Yeah. And so then I have to so at this point I have to make a decision. Am I just going to cancel it? Which was probably what most people would have done. But I did not. I was young and dumb and in the right place at the right time and also kind of ignorant. But it means that I went ahead and said, hey, no, look, I'm going to fight for jiu-jitsu. And I'll be honest with you, another thing that kind of helped was I didn't back down. I actually went and I talked to some people online and I explained to them what was going on. And I think I got the support of the jiu-jitsu community across the country. And that's, I think, really what motivated me, because I was like, hey, everybody, listen to what's going on. This is what happened. You know, jiu-jitsu's banned in West Virginia. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? And everybody was on my side. And then I'm sure maybe somebody else actually helped with the decision and said, hey man, like, you know, you should fight that, which sounds great, right? It sounds great on paper, but I don't know if people understand how much money's involved in doing such a thing. It's a lot of money just to say that I'm right, right? Um, yeah.
Right. And, ultimately you were able to prevail in this case. Judge Kaufman here in Kanawha County entered an order prohibiting the boxing commission at that time from stopping the tournament. And, that was a big win. And, speaking, from a lawyer's perspective, these types of orders are not entered lightly, and it's very rare to successfully obtain this type of relief. It just doesn't happen very often, most especially not when a state agency is involved. And so, it is, from a legal perspective, it was something. In fact, in it, I believe I've got another, I'll stop sharing, but I've got an article here from a magazine, if I'm not mistaken. Pull that up real quickly.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we don't want to get, but also I want to say that I guess this is because what I was thinking while I was talking about that, I don't want people to think that this court case was brought to me because the commission hated me, right? And I think maybe the way that I was talking, I might have lead people to think that, and it's not. It's that I think it was pretty clear that there was any threat to boxing at the time was an issue, right? And jiu-jitsu was one of them, roundabout. But there was strong concern about chokehold. So it wasn't really an attack on me, even though it was an attack on me. It was an attack on jiu-jitsu, meaning that I was told to my face by the people that brought the case up that they would never, that chokeholds are so dangerous, and it was unbelievable that we actually choked somebody till they went unconscious, and on and on and on. Where, you know, my argument was, again, the judo argument in the Olympics, but the other was that I'm like, okay, well, so you'd rather me punch somebody to the face until they go unconscious. I just don't understand how you're thinking that this is safer. So it was really an attack on the art of jiu-jitsu. It was not a personal attack on me, even though I of course took it that way at the time, because I felt like I was the ambassador for the state of West Virginia jiu-jitsu right at the time. But believe me, I just want to make that clear that it was not an attack on me. It was they made jiu-jitsu illegal, as it said in here. They were not going to ever let you do a jiu-jitsu tournament, and they did not want you doing it in the gym, period. They said that they wanted us to stop doing it in the gym, which would effectively shut down gyms. You know, it was a very strange time. But yes, go ahead.
And it's hard, again, for me to fully appreciate that, again, based upon my experience. I mean, when I decided to do this, not only did I have a gym, I also had a lot of training partners, and it, people who had been doing this for a very long time. And, it's pretty widely accepted. I mean, there, essentially, if I wanted to compete every weekend, I could.
Yes. Yeah.
Which was very different at that time.
Yeah. And again, yeah. So like, I'm throwing a tournament because there is no tournaments, right? Yeah. I'm giving people an avenue to compete, myself included, or people that, at our gym included. And then that was taken away from us, right? So at the time too, I want people to understand that there was hardly any tournaments anywhere. Nowadays we have grappling industries. We've got Grapplers Quest, we've got Naga, we've got Fuji, and I don't want to, I'm not dropping it because I don't want to remember, there's a million, right? There wasn't such a thing. It just was not a thing. And so that was why I did it. Because, then later, after I'm doing tournaments now, then real people come out, meaning that, tournament that actually has a marketing power behind them, and actually has a brand, and has the things that I didn't even know that those things existed, right? And they have mats with their name on them. And they, it makes people want to show up, and those, that's great, right? But this didn't exist back then. So that's also why I started doing tournaments, and why, really, to be honest, why I continue to do tournaments now. I do regional tournaments, knowing that I'm not the big tournament name, but the reason is to give people an opportunity to compete locally without traveling very far, without spending a bunch of money, right? It's really the same mission I had back then that I do now. The difference now is it's accepted. I could do a tournament every day if I wanted to. and everybody's happy. Nobody cares. Like, but back then it was crazy. And in this article that you have up here too is for people to understand, there is one magazine in the entire country, maybe the world, called Grappling Magazine that featured us. There was probably more. There, Gracie Magazine I think was out too, and I'm being a little bit exaggerating a little bit, but it was probably one of two or three. You know what I'm saying? And so this was a huge article in there. It pointed the fact it helped get some pressure on the state, which was the point, right? A lot of these things getting us out there was just bringing recognition to the fight and to the battle and what we were going through. And so I had, a lot of people behind me, as you can see in these pictures. I mean, Hoist is obviously in a picture. That's my gym at the time and some people there. But I'm in the lower right-hand corner of this thing. I'm in a picture with the entire Gracie family, which is Elio Gracie, which arguably is the guy that invented the sport, and his entire family there. The Orion Gracie and Cara Gracie and Henner, and you know what I'm saying? Like because of all this, I was able to, connect with some great people that helped West Virginia Jiu-Jitsu, West Virginia MMA, just to make it a place where we can do what you want to do now, right? There was nothing hidden behind that. There's no agenda on my side. It was just to give us all an opportunity to do what we love.
Got it. And so, after this, you obviously continue the fight, really, as part of a larger war, really, to get MMA legalized. I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you did that, or why you continued with that effort. And I know at this point in time, you're training people, right?
Yeah. And that was, exactly. So when I started a gym, again, it was the same thing. I started a gym because there was no other gym. There was no other people training. So it started with a labor of love, meaning that, put some mats in my garage or my basement, whatever, and, I went from having 2 friends that trained to, half a dozen to a dozen, to where I couldn't train in my house anymore. Because there's too many men in my wife at the time was going to kill me, right? It's just a lot of grunts coming from the basement, and she thought it was weird, So we're like, hey man, we're going to have to open a gym. So we found a place locally, all chipped in. It was not really what I would consider a gym or what anybody else would consider a gym. As a club, right? We all chipped in enough to pay the rent, did our stuff. And really, if you look back on it, I would consider us almost like a fight club in a weird way, meaning that we didn't know any different. We weren't a jiu-jitsu gym, because at the time we looked at jiu-jitsu really as what Hoist did, meaning that I'm going to take jiu-jitsu, I'm going to do MMA. So that's continue on. We had the jiu-jitsu tournaments, but I'm like, okay, well, the next step, the logical step for us is what Hoist does, and that's MMA. So we're looking for places to fight. And again, there's very little places to fight, but however, I think Kentucky and Ohio and some of the neighboring states started having small events. And look, man, these events, if you look at them today, crazy. I mean, these people, we fought some people, it's not because we were trying to fight people that we could beat, but we literally, I'd be talking to so many people we fought, and I'm like, well, where do you train? And they're like, well, in somebody's backyard, and we just move the rocks and, blah, blah, blah. And it's crazy, because that's what everybody had to deal with. There was no gyms, there was nothing right there. So in a weird way, we were more organized than people. And then, so my goal shifted at that time. I was like, hey, and I'm a big fan of Pride in the UFC, and we had some guys in those big events already. And I was like, well, I really want to be, this great MMA trainer. Right? That was my thing. So, and I had a boxing background and kickboxing stuff, and I did some of these little tiny things. And so that's what we did. We were doing that and traveling around, and just got to a point where, especially this is what happened. As we got better, our team name started getting known. At the time, we were called Advanced BJJ, as you saw in that little thing. And even that name's dumb. The reason I picked that name, to be honest with you, is because there's an A, and it put me first in the telephone book, right? That's when people use telephone books, So it really means nothing. I just need an A word, So anyway, they start knowing, like, hey man, that Advanced BJJ's team showing up. They see our t-shirts, and then a lot of these teams, they would drop out. So I'd bring 4 people down to Kentucky. We'd drive 6-8 hours for, these little places, Summersville, Kentucky, Hazard, Kentucky, Lexington, Louisville, really far, right? And then people did literally see us get out of the car and wouldn't fight us, right? And so that's what spurred the thing. I was like, my fighters or my people were so upset, and I was upset because I'm spending money on travel, food, hotel. I'm also helping my fighters, who most of them are poor and doing their thing, right? And I'm paying all this money, and we get there, and then if you don't fight, you don't get reimbursed anything. And so that happened a lot. Plus, a lot of people's dreams, that's all they prepared for. That's all they wanted to do is compete. So I was like, man, we're going to have to we got to get something going on here so that you can be the hometown hero. Enough going to Kentucky and fighting the local legend. Let's make it to where you're the local legend. That's what we need. You can sell tickets, your friends, you can have a fan base, you know? And so that started the fight to make MMA legal here. It kind of upped the thing, right? I mean, we started the fight in 2001, but it's not that it gave up on it. It's just that I'm fighting a battle for something that I don't see where I'm going to. I don't know anybody throwing shows on. You know, I'm not. You know, what I mean, so it's like, it's not that I forgot about it. It's just that it wasn't in the forefront then. But it then became forefront because I'm like, man, we need somewhere to compete. We need to get this going. And again, it's not that I was going to think throwing shows whatsoever, but I did know some promoters at that point. So from Kentucky, and I would have been like, hey man, just come down to West Virginia and throw this show. I'll help you. And actually, you know, the closest we got before this was Ashland, Kentucky, which is an hour and a half from here. But that's what I did. I brought a Kentucky promoter to Ashland, Kentucky, so that we can actually try to sell tickets. It's still an hour and a half away. You know, it's an event that it did okay, but it still told me that, look, you know, if somebody's going to drive an hour and a half, it's not going to happen, right? You need to be closer, you know?
And so with this battle, you brought people in to help, and there were people helping along the way. Could you identify some of those folks?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, yeah, there's a lot of, because how do you do this, right? That's what I'm thinking. How do I do this? So I do like anybody, I contact our local, whatever they are. You got to tell me what they are.
Delegates, senators.
Yeah, things that I should know and I keep forgetting, but contact them, write them emails, phone calls, meet in person, you know, just, and so do several other people, right? It doesn't really go anywhere. We don't know why, but you know, we do what we can do. So the next step is bringing in more people to do that. But I'll kind of jump ahead. What really kind of happened about this time, I think we were talking about the UFC started catching some wind where they wanted to be legal in every state, and they virtually were at that point, right? 48 of 50 states, meaning that the only two were West Virginia and New York. Very strange, right? New York was a target for them because they wanted to be in Madison Square Garden. It's a fight mecca of the world. Muhammad Ali had fought there, you know, tons of great fights there. Everybody knows of the Madison Square Garden, right? It's a thing. Plus, it's New York, right? Great place business wise for them to throw a show. So their thought was, hey, if we're legal in every state, it's gonna bolster, you know, our argument when we go to New York. And they had already failed a couple of times. They got really close, and it would always fail right at the end. So that's when they put a little bit more a bigger target here, and I got in contact with them. But also they hired a great lobbyist named Sam. I'm not gonna. We talked about this last. I don't know if these people have mentioned or not. I'm assuming they're fine, but maybe not. But it's Sam. If he wants his name mentioned, I'll put it at the end of the other thing. But he was important because he did a lot of the work. I don't understand, and just like I don't even know what I'm talking about, right? And I say I don't know if they're delegates or like I don't even know the process. Almost like I didn't know the court process and the jiu-jitsu thing, and just I went through it and got lucky. But basically you need to have a lobbyist, which means he's going to go and he knows how the process works, get you right in front of the right people, and he does the right things. I mean, he was setting me up with meetings left and right with people I needed to talk to sway the vote in a particular way. For example, you know, we were bringing in, I had a guy that trained with me at the time. His name is Rick Bowman, and I do know him really well, so I know he's fine with it, but he's a physician locally. And so that gave us we have a intelligent guy, a physician who also trains jiu-jitsu and MMA, right? So to me, it made a lot of sense. He went up there, he was able to give credibility to it. I also had special forces guys that trained with me. Special forces guys are weird. So one of his name's Steve and some other guys, right? Like I got to be careful on those guys, but same thing. They came fully dressed, all their medals looked very professional. We gave tons of speeches. We gave those guys gave a bunch of interviews. And so Sam got us in the right places at the right time. which also was done by Zuffa, which they were at the time, which is the UFC essentially. So we had the right people this time. It wasn't myself, just running around talking to people.
And this is
we did the right things, right.
And so this is 2011. You're able to get a bill introduced. It's House Bill 2562. And I think it's important for people to understand a little bit of how the process works, because the process itself is not easy. Basically, what we have in West Virginia is a 60-day legislative session. So anything that's going to get done has to get done within that 60 days.
Yeah.
So in order for something that is unlawful, like MMA at the time, to become lawful, you've got to make a change to a statute. And the way you do that is you get somebody, either a senator, a delegate, or senators or delegates, to introduce a bill. But that's not the end of the story. There are hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands, of bills that are introduced every legislative session. Many of them are never, ever set on an agenda, i.e., in order to get passed, a bill has to get set on certain agendas. The agendas are, for instance, if it's passed or it's introduced in the House, then it has to get on a House committee. And it might be 2 committees, and it's got to get through those committees. Then it's got to get over to the floor of the House, and then it's got to pass from the floor of the House to the Senate, and it's got to go back through the committees in the Senate. Again, then back on the Senate floor. And then finally, assuming if there are differences, then the Senate and the House have to get together, reconcile those differences, and then and only then does it go to the governor for a signature. And so this process in of itself is designed in some respects to be very difficult, and it is a difficult process. And so in 2011, basically, it seems like the stars aligned to some degree. The right people were there, and you are able to make a major push, and a bill passed. MMA is now legal, correct?
Correct. But yeah, and I'm glad you explained that thing, because people don't understand how, you said it, how incredibly hard that was. I would not know, as just a regular citizen, how this works, right? I was astonished to be part of that and understand how government worked to a certain degree and how bills are passed and how difficult it was, because I was ignorant, meaning that I thought I just went up and told somebody how I felt. He listened, and he or she listened, and then voted accordingly, right? And that kind of happens to a degree, right?
Yeah, and I think part of the issue was, and just like we haven't really talked a lot about this, but just same thing with jiu-jitsu. Not having necessarily background, right? We know that jiu-jitsu is an extremely safe sport, right? In a given week, I don't know, I might roll 30 or 40 times.
Yeah.
And with no problems whatsoever. And now, again, with boxing, and don't mean to juxtapose that, but if you go 30 or 40 rounds of boxing in a particular week, you might get your bell rung a couple of times.
Yeah.
And let's talk about, I think there was also some concerns about or MMA too, right? Safety concerns that you had to overcome. What were some of those concerns?
The concerns were, it really is I keep using the word ignorant, and I mean that in the nicest way. I'm saying that means you don't know any better, right? I'm going against people that have ignorance of the sport. We're talking about old men and women, right? Listen, I did some of the crazy, like that was one of the craziest things that I did. I'm testifying in front of all these people, right? I brought a crowd with me. I think normally when these bills go up and like somebody might get up and talk and there's like 4 people sitting there, right? I'd have a crowd of all these fighters and all this stuff behind me, right? And I'm giving this heartfelt conversation because I'm preparing what essentially I would think a lawyer is preparing for. I'm already looking at all the objections. I know that they have safety concerns. I've kind of heard some of the stuff in the private meetings what people had to say. So I'm up here, I've got studies behind me, I've got this, I've got that. So I'm up here and I'm talking, and this also should be known as not just me talking. So after I would speak or before I would speak, the boxing commission would get up and tell them how dangerous this was and how they're saving everybody from this. And this is no more than cockfighting in a cage, human cockfighting. Literally, that's the words they're using. So I'm combating this where people like one of the ladies, I don't remember her name, but a nice older lady, but she looked at me, she's like, "You guys fight in a cage?" And I'm like, well, yeah, but this is because we'd fall out of the ring, right? And she's like, fall? What do you mean you'd fall out of the ring? I'm like, well, because there's takedowns. You tackle people? You know, so like, so imagine this is like me speaking to somebody's grandma, and she's like, what? And so then, then I'm getting, well, okay, so what are the safety? What do you do for safety? In boxing, they wear 16-ounce gloves and they have headgear. And so I have to explain to them, no, this is not safety for the fighter. This is reason we have 16-ounce gloves is to protect the fighter's hand from breaking, from punching the other guy in the head. It has zero safety to do with the guy because it's the whipping action that knocks him out. And a 16-ounce glove, sweaty, is like getting hit with a bowling ball, at some point. And they're like, they're just like, what? You know what I mean? Like, but the point was saying, hey, listen, I still like boxing. I love boxing. I'm boxed. I won Golden Gloves. I'm a boxer. I'm not against it. I'm just saying we accept that and everybody's fine with it. And this sport arguably is safer. The problem is what we're overcoming. Two things we had to overcome, more than two, but the biggest things were the way the early UFCs were marketed was as a blood sport. They literally said 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. And they showed blood and made it look like a death sport, right? So anybody that saw that old marketing, that's what they thought of. The other thing is there is more soft tissue damage in most MMA fights, meaning that, these gloves cut you. There's a lot of cuts. And unlike boxing where you get a bunch of Vaseline on you and, they do this and do that and clean you up, you're bleeding a lot in this, and they're not stopping these little things. So there's a lot of little cuts. And as we know, the little cuts in your face and head bleed a lot. So I'm overcoming things that aren't safety concerns. They're really a visual concern, right? So I'm trying to explain this and still go with, while I'm also having the same argument as before, meaning they're choking people unconscious. These people may never wake up. They may die, right? Like they're choking him. What if they don't let go? Stuff like that. So I'm like, well, first of all, they tap out. We have a referee, and I'm trying to explain all that. So just imagine, this seems, for people that do the sport, it seems easy, right? But imagine you're explaining this to an old lady, an old man that don't even like boxing. Like, it's going to be very hard to say, well, sure, let's let this go, right? So on top of that, I'm also trying to understand, or my other argument was at the time, the economic impact that it would have for the state of West Virginia, that, how much revenue that these events bring in, the UFC brings in, how these local fighters will finally have somewhere to train and compete and showcase their skills and bring in some fans to watch. And maybe we could fill up the Civic Center. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do it. Maybe we could bring the UFC in. Maybe we could, try to put it all together to where maybe I'd catch something. Maybe somebody's into the money thing. They really want to help West Virginia grow, right? All these things are true, but it's like catching the right argument for the right person at the right time. So yeah, it was crazy to be honest, right? Like it was, and I will, the speeches help. They do help. There's an impact there. A lot of people gave some good speeches, but I'll be honest, the commission gave the counter argument, and it was very powerful as well, because you have these guys up that have state appointed positions, and they're in their suits and they look nice, and they are actually, most of them are government appointed positions or governor appointed positions. Those people have credibility, right? And we're a bunch of fighters, and so it's very, very, very difficult. People understand, and that's why it took so long, right? It took so long to fight. But I mean, people understand how difficult this was. It was very difficult.
And so, but ultimately, you and others were able to prevail, and you decided to go ahead and hold the first MMA sanctioned event here in West Virginia.
Yeah. So yeah, same thing. I want to, it's much like the others, right? It's right place, right time. Arguably, I would argue maybe right place, wrong time in a weird way, meaning that I never wanted to be an MMA promoter ever. Okay. The reason is I've been to a bunch of these events. I have some friends that are promoters to this day, but there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on, right? And I wanted to avoid that, because I didn't know, is it the event that makes you shady, or what is it, or just shady people get in? I just didn't want to be part of that. But the point was, what happened was, as soon as it became legal, a lot of boxing promoters that I considered, like I said, shady, or just, they're boxing promoters. They didn't know how to throw an MMA event, right? I'm getting contacted left and right by these guys, because we had local fighters, maybe like arguably the only fighters locally. Obviously there was some fighters in Morgantown and Huntington and Beckley, maybe, at the time. There's fighters all over now, but at the time there wasn't a whole bunch of people. But so that's why I'm getting, they all want our fighters, but I'm like, well, like, I just didn't trust these people to put the event on. Like, the more I talked to him, I remember I going to this one guy who just kept writing me. So I probably had 3 or 4 private meetings with him at a local restaurant. And like the 4th time I was like, why do you keep meeting? Well, like, what are you wanting? Right. And then he got to the meat of it, and he was literally trying to rip off all of our fighters. Like, I just wasn't happy about it. So I was like, and then the guy said, and I was like, well, look, I'll be honest with you. We were having this talk. I said, like, what do we need you for? Right. Because we started getting an argument. He said, well, because you can't throw one. You don't know what you're doing. So, all right, that's it. So I'm going to throw the first event then. That's period. And again, I don't want it to make it sound just because I was mad at this guy. My point was, look, we worked so hard to get it. I don't want these boxing promoters, the same people, these literally actually, and that's the other thing I want to make a point. The same people that were in court or in the legislative session arguing that this should not be legal were the same people that were in the front of the line trying to put MMA shows on. The same people. And that made us all mad, because when I'm getting up and testifying, when somebody else is getting up testifying, the same people that were rebutting my testimony and saying that it should never be legal are literally the same people that are trying to throw the first MMA event. So of course I know these guys aren't going to do our sport justice, is what I'm thinking. So anyway, the rules were not, so even though we won that case, let's take a back step here. The commission still had some power. So they put in essentially a bunch of rules.
Well, you said, even though you won that, let's say the bill passed. So you have a statute, but then, you have a state agency essentially who's in charge with then defining the contours. What are the rules? And that's a whole separate process. And so
they're not happy. They lost, right? In my opinion. So
they put some interesting, or some, say, onerous rules in place.
Yeah, they put rules in place that quite honestly made it nearly impossible to throw an event. And it made it so costly that who would throw an event, right? So one of them was like, there's no amateur, so it was all professional fighters. That's a problem, because there's not very many, if hardly any, professional West Virginia fighters, right? So that was the point of doing the event, was to have a showcase for these guys, and then they made it all professional. So that meant, well, there goes that, you know what I mean? And then the next it was just the venue had to be certain size. There was no venues in West Virginia of that size. I think the minimum seating requirement was, let's say 3,500. I think, I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's really, outside of the Civic Center, there's just not a lot of places that big. And once you get into a place that big, the rental fees are huge. And I mean, so it comes to a fact where the money adds up, and they know it's a difficult thing to do. So even with all these terrible rules, I was going to move forward. So I did. And so I decided, I looked for a place, Civic Center. It was all booked up because they have monster truck things, concerts. You can't just say, hey, I want to do a thing tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. Luckily, I did find something in Williamson, West Virginia, that meet the seating requirements. So we hurried up and did the first event in Williamson, West Virginia.
And that was January 2012.
Yes, and one of the, we hurried up for a couple of reasons. Is we were trying to get this event done fast, and trying to get this thing on the books, really, because if you missed the timeline, then you couldn't do it again for another 6 months, right? So this fine line window, and we had to hurry up, put this together. And again, that meant there wasn't very many pros. Okay. The other really terrible thing that the commission had at that time is they had to approve all the fights. So even though they know nothing about MMA, I would put on, let's say, 20 fights, right? They would wait until a week before the fight and then say, well, I don't agree with this fight. They cut it. I don't agree with this fight. They cut it, right? So the other thing, it had to have 10 fights minimum. So that's kind of where they had you. So I could have the whole fight lined up, every match perfect, and then they could cut all the fights because they didn't approve them. And then you didn't have the 10 fight minimum, which meant you would lose all your money. So I mean, it was very risky. All the way down to the wire, I was literally arguing on the phone, screaming matches with people because they're telling me these fighters shouldn't fight each other because I'm like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like they're all even, because here's what I thought when I did an event. Like I said, somebody told me, first of all, I couldn't do it. So I'm like, well, look, I'm going to do it and it's going to be awesome. Right. I don't know much about promoting events at the time, but I watched a lot of UFC. So I thought if I could make something very similar, meaning high caliber fights. I had UFC fighters, former UFC fighters on my event. I had UFC referees at my event. I had lights and smoke and, I had I mean,
Right.
music. And I took everything that I knew that fighters liked, for my fighters and put it together quickly. Look, and it wasn't perfect, but for what was being put on for boxing shows, it destroyed those boxing shows, the other ones. And I was very proud of it. The quality of the fights are very good. The place was sold out. It was a great event. Let's put it that way. And then I had guests there. Dan Severn again, who I also had, he came down. So several other UFC fighters actually were there in the crowd signing autographs. Because I paid for, because that was the other thing. I was like, well, I'm going to throw this fight, and even if I can't have Dan Severn fight or I can't have this guy fight, I'm going to pay for him to come. So I would fly him in, and that was, I was like, well, this will draw people in, but I'm trying to make this an event, like not just like a fight, because I wanted you to go, I wanted a lawyer to go, I wanted doctors to go, and they did. That was the thing. I tried to make it a little bit more professional. I had what you call tables, meaning that you purchase a table for 8 people, and then you just act like you're cool, but it was awesome.
And so you have a successful event, you turn around, you do it again in May of 2012, but this time it's Civic Center, correct?
Yeah, because I finally got a date for the Civic Center, and that was the point, right? I had some local fighters that I wanted to get here. So we turned some of our fighters pro, and that's also not, you can't just say you're pro, you had to have a minimum fight. So we had to hurry up and get some people some fights out of state, amateur fights. I think you had to have 5 fights minimum to turn pro at the time, roughly. Some of these things I might get wrong, but pretty close. So anyway,
Some number,
yeah. That's, and also thing. Remember, the West Virginia is not going to turn them pro because they're not a fan. So I would have to get them fights in Ohio or Kentucky, then have Ohio or Kentucky turn them pro, so that I wouldn't have that argument here as well. So I'm always jumping through hoops. Now let me tell you about the Civic Center. That place is gigantic, right? I am. It's listen. That is one thing that all these things when I look back at, like there's some cool things I'm shocked I did, but that one kind of stands out because I just remember going like the circus and stuff at the Civic Center, right? And you just look around, or monster trucks, and this place is so big. And then all of a sudden I'm the guy in the middle setting up a cage and driving a car in there, and then trying to think, okay, this place is so huge. How can I make it to where it's enjoyable for this giant arena now, where they can see the fighter walk down? So I'm actually like, again, I'm copying a lot of stuff from UFC, but I put up these giant screens, because that's the other thing. Like, if I'm way in the nosebleed seats, how am I going to see these little fighters once they hit the ground? So, 4 jumbotrons that I purchased through union workers again, and that cost me a bunch of money. But the points again was wasn't trying to be a promoter and make money. I don't want to lose money. Of course, I had no money. Also people need to know that I maxed out every credit card known to man to make this happen, and took a giant risk, which my wife, I give her a lot of credit, and I've told her this before too, is never one time she's like, I don't think we should do this. She just like, okay. She believed in me.
Your wife being who?
Yeah, Lisa Hiles, the most important person. But yeah, I mean, and I've told her that too. To have such trust, I don't know if I could have the same trust in my wife if she came and said, hey, I need to spend, because we're talking, I don't want to get in the numbers, but we're talking some crazy numbers, right? Like, could have bought a house or a couple of houses for what I paid for this stuff, right? And I didn't know if anybody was gonna show up, right? And here's the thing: as the shows went on, we still didn't have a lot of local fighters, and that's who we're hoping are gonna show up, right? So maybe on that show, I had all I could have. I think I called it West Virginia versus the world, right? And so that meant I probably had 10 West Virginia fighters. But let's be honest, I'm not gonna sell out I don't know how 13,000 seat arena with 10 local fighter, that it also is assuming that you're an MMA fan. And
Right. All those
so anyway, it did okay. I think we
things.
sold the first one, 5,000, 6,000 seats. That's a lot for the time.
Sure.
But yeah, anyway, good.
So you have two successful events, but to kind of top it all off, UFC's happy with what you did. So what did the UFC do for you?
Yeah, so that was the coolest part. I think one of the coolest part is that they contacted me and said, "Hey, man, like because of all the work that you did, we want to invite you to the UFC. They're having a UFC in Pittsburgh, which is the closest that they came at the time. You and they literally said anybody that I want to bring, right? So I think I brought 8, 9 people, so maybe more. I don't know, but it was total VIP. It was insanely awesome. It actually made, I told you this the other day, it made it nearly impossible for me to go to any UFC ever again, because they literally gave us run of the mill the entire event, put us in the best seats. Not only put us in the best seats, as we're sitting in these awesome, amazing seats, fighter after Joe Rogan, after Tap Out Crew just kept coming over to us like we're celebrities, saying, "Hey man, thanks for all that you did. Amazing experience." And then somewhere in the middle of the event, not even the middle, probably, right at the beginning, they come and get me, take me into the back. Fighters are getting ready. They actually had me follow one of the fighters out, let him go out, and then I followed out 10 seconds after, so that I could feel what it's like to get called out in the middle of a UFC event. Went down, hugged the ring card girls, crazy, like the most, basically made me
okay with that, right?
Yeah, it was, well, she could not be, because she's, I think, but the same. I mean, she was around all these
Sure.
beautiful muscled men too, right? So it was insane. And plus, on top of that, it was funny because obviously we know who Joe Rogan is, but Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz are doing a comedy event the same day. We both are famous. They put us front row of their comedy special, which, both those were world famous now because of the podcast, as before podcast days. Anyway, unbelievable. It was the greatest. The main event was Czech Congo versus Pat Barry's, one of the biggest upsets, not really an upset, but one of the most epic fights in history. It's great to be part of it. Hung out with Dana White, hung out with everybody. Amazing. So the point was, that was awesome. So that's all they ever had to do to say thank you. But I also want to say this, look, they did a lot of stuff, right? And so did Sam, the key guy, right? So I think because I was the face of the stuff, I get a lot of credit for all this stuff. But man, listen, like if it wasn't for Zuf and the UFC, it wasn't for Sam, none of us would be where we're at today. Everybody has, I want to give a lot of credit for all that stuff. They made, the process that we talked about earlier, that we kind of joked about, if it was not for Sam and telling me where to go and what to do, and then literally sending me emails like, "Look, man, we're really close on votes. I need you to fill up the place with the local people. I need people to testify. I need people to do this, to do that." He worked his butt off, and I'm sure also got rewarded for it. But dude, that guy, he killed it, right? And the UFC killed it, and I was thankful to be part of it. I am thankful to be part of it.
And so, kind of brings us full circle. So again, my experience, very different, right? Everything's established. Got tournaments, got a place to train at, I've got people to train with. If I want to, again, compete, I can compete here in West Virginia. Obviously, I have choices of competing elsewhere too. And so, I think part of what we're talking about today, and part of what this is about, is to tell the story about how this actually came full circle. Because, the reality is, and we've talked about this before, things just don't happen. It's just not happenstance. Things happen because people take stands, and they look around the world around them, and they see things that maybe aren't right and that need to be remedied, and they do something about it. And I guess I'd like just to kind of conclude with, by saying thank you for what you did, what others did, but also just to say, give you kind of a last word, if you will, what ultimately motivated you more than anything else to take this thing on, push this thing along, for over 10 years?
I would think it was first of all, it was literally just to do what's right. If I talked to somebody, they said, hey, I don't like this, and this, therefore it's illegal, right? That's not what's right, right? This is not how you make decisions, right? And so that's what all started it. I wanted an opportunity for everybody to do what I'm able to do now, and what we're able to do. Like you said, we take it for granted now, but there's a time where it was in jeopardy that all the things that I love to do, I was not going to be able to do, right? Meaning that all I could have done is box, and I like boxing, right? But to be honest, I mean, even kickboxing was not legal here at the time, and they didn't allow head kicks and stuff. So there's more to the story, right, that we didn't get to, but it's not right. And that was the thing. Nobody should have the power to tell you can't do what you want to do because of their personal opinion. And look, and that it gets down to like a little shady or a little sketchy area, what I mean by that. But I think you guys know what I mean. Like, we love jiu-jitsu, we love to compete. We love MMA. And for a lot of us, I think we noticed this in this pandemic, right? When this was taken away from us, when the gyms were shut down, people suffered mentally. They suffered physically. They suffered a lot, right? And that's what was going to happen to us in 2005 when they took that away. If somebody would took away my, I realized, especially now, again in 2020, what I realized in 2005, I don't like anything else as far as working out goes. There's one thing I like. I like hugging other men. No, I'm just kidding. I like the physical aspect of jiu-jitsu, the human chess of jiu-jitsu. It stimulates my mind, it stimulates my body, it keeps me in shape. It's made me the man that I am today, because I wake up. If you beat me yesterday, I stew about it all night. I have to decide how to get better, and that's what motivates me in life. And that was the thing. Somebody one time told me that you can never do this again, and that was not right for me. So some things at the right place at the right time, but I wanted to make sure that I gave everybody the opportunity to do the things that they also enjoyed. And look, because of those things, now we have a great jiu-jitsu community that arguably has done things that I would have never ever done, right? These great gyms and great competitors. And the same with MMA. Some of these gyms in West Virginia have fought in the UFC and fought in Strikeforce and done things that I dreamed of doing, and that are amazing. And I'm thankful that everybody's had that opportunity, that we all have the opportunity to do it, and then we never really have to think about it again, which is awesome, right? So I'm thankful it all happened the way it did happen. A lot of it, to be honest, was probably luck. Right?
There's nothing wrong with luck.
No, so yeah, it's awesome.
Luck is usually the product of hard work. So great. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time, Butch, and I think this is an amazing story, and I think it's something that needs to be told. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
We got to talk about West Virginia MMA. Oh, we didn't think we'd be talking about West Virginia MMA maybe a year or so ago. Butch Hiles, UFC, they got together to work to get it legalized. On January 1st, it was. Oh. And now, Butch talks to Inside MMA about the importance of having it in the Mountain State.
For years, I have fighters at my gym. We'd have to travel across the country, and we were always fighting the hometown hero, and therefore we couldn't build up a fan base. We couldn't do the things that we wanted to do, and it just wasn't fair. So, I worked really hard to make sure that these guys can actually fight in their home state and bring their fans. So that tonight, on our card, we've got tons of West Virginia guys. That's what we wanted to have, and they're here in front of their friends and family, and it's going to be a huge show.
Almost Heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountain. Everybody, country roads, take me home. Jump in anytime. To the place. Okay, in Williamson, West Virginia, we go. Nate Jolly and David Mays. West Virginia. Lightweights. Good knees, good punches. Country mama.
Take me home, yo ho, yo ho.
And it's jolly.
To work we go.
I will take that knife and stick it up your butt, as well as punch you in the face. Nate Jolly, his 11th victory all over David Mays, gets a unanimous decision.
It's
And
quite jolly.
would you guess these are heavyweights?
It's quite jolly. Talking about jolly.
McMullins and Greg Maynard.
Like two butterballs going at it.
Shades of Butterbean.
We're going from jolly to jelly.
McMullins.
Heavy punches, though.
That is heavy. Not only that, you know it, man. He got the TKO. He throws out his mouthpiece. Hey, I got it.
He's like, I'm ready to eat.
I'm ready. I'm ready to eat. Billy Eilish against J.A. Dudley. More heavyweights going at it here.
Look at this, A-team style, Quentin.
I know. Look at it. B.A. Shut up, fool.
You know what? I saw a remake of that show. It was a movie, and a guy sounded just like you that did that.
I know, man.
Just like you.
It's weird, man.
He's not B.A., but he's J.A. J.A. Dudley gets the win with the rear naked choke. Welcome to the MMA world, West Virginia. Great state.
Wow.
Big win for the Mountaineers over Clemson, by the way, in football last week.
And great song as well.
That is a great song.
Yeah, it really is.
No,
If you go to a bar,
disagree.
everybody starts singing it.
I disagree.